here and across the country as we kick off our coffee with the candidates town hall.
And let's not wait another moment. Let's welcome our special guest, Senator Ted Cruz and his wife Heidi as our live. A lot of voters to say hello to this morning.
How you doing? Great to see you. Great to see you.
It's important. We've got a lot of voters here in New York. You know, you can't let one go by. We're going to talk to Mrs. Cruz in just a moment. We're kind of up here, Senator.
Good morning.
Nice morning.
Great to see you again.
Very good to see you.
And as you said, George, we will get to Heidi Cruz in just a moment. You got to work. It's like working a rope line getting up here.
That's a good problem to have.
It is. Congratulations. Another good weekend, picking up all 14 available delegates in Wyoming. Yet
Thank you.
Trump still is saying, Donald Trump continues to say that the system is rigged. And here's what he said again just on Sunday.
It's a rigged system. It's a crooked system. It's 100% crooked. It's a corrupt and crooked system.
Senator Cruz, how do you respond to what he's saying?
Well, listen, Donald is not a complicated man to understand. He doesn't handle losing well. There have been a total of 5 states that voted in the last 3 weeks. In those 5 states, starting from Utah, North Dakota, Wisconsin, Colorado, and Wyoming, 1.3 million people voted in those 5 states. And he lost all 5. We have won 5 in a row. And Donald's upset, so he's throwing a fit.
But he's set up for a pretty big win here in New York. And even if you do very well in May and June, he's most likely to go into the convention with the most votes, the most states won, and the most delegates. And most Republican voters think that person should be the nominee. What do you say to that?
Well, if Donald is the nominee, Hillary Clinton wins. And she wins by double digits. And I don't believe Donald is going to be the nominee. As I said, 5 states in a row, we've won landslides over and over and over again. The stakes are too high for us to hand the election to Hillary Clinton, which is what nominating Donald Trump does.
But you can't overtake him before June.
In all likelihood, we're going to go into a contested convention, which means nobody has a majority. And I'll have a ton of delegates, he'll have a ton of delegates. And it's going to be a battle in Cleveland to see who can get to a majority. You can't get the nomination without earning a majority of the delegates elected by the people. And I believe Donald's highest total will be on that first ballot, and he will go steadily down because Donald cannot win, and we don't want to nominate someone who's a loser in November.
We're talking about those all-important delegates. We actually have one. We talked to about down in Louisiana. His name is Luke Letlow. He's an unbound delegate from Louisiana. Here's his question.
Senator Cruz, some people suggest that you've developed a reputation in the Senate for being an obstructionist and are often unable to work with your colleagues on both sides of the aisle. But our future president of the United States will clearly need to build coalitions of support in order to succeed. What are your plans to mend fences, work with Congress, and give the people like those of us here in Stark, Louisiana, the open, honest, effective government we deserve?
Well, listen, I think it is a terrific question. Everyone understands right now that Washington is broken. People are frustrated with career politicians in both parties because they're not listening to us. They're not doing what they said they would do. Both Democrats and Republicans, they make promises and they lie, and then they go to Washington, they don't do it. And I will plead guilty to having stood up to the career politicians in Washington, stood up both to Democrats and leaders of my own party, because what's happening in Washington is broken. Now, fast forward after we win. Once we win, I believe that I'm going to have a very productive and positive relationship with Congress. Why? Because when you've got a strong conservative president driving an agenda, Congress will work hand in hand, just like Ronald Reagan did. Remember, Reagan in '76 primaried Gerald Ford for much the same reason, because he believed Republicans weren't standing for anything. And what changed when Reagan came in and won in 1980 was he won with the support of the people. The Reagan Revolution was a grassroots movement. The reason why we are winning state after state after state is an army of the grassroots rising up, and that's really our strength, and it's unifying the party.
And it's up to the voters, and I know you want to hear from the voters
Absolutely.
that we have here, so let's get to Amy.
All right, yes, and I'm here with James Thompson. He is from Staten Island and is still undecided at this moment. So, James, what's your question for Senator Cruz?
Senator, in January, you famously criticized New York values. Many of us are frustrated with the policies that you specified. We were lumped into your criticism as New Yorkers. Having spent the past few days here, if you could rephrase your statement, would you do it over again?
Well, James, thank you for being here, and it is wonderful to be back in New York. You know, the phrase New York values actually didn't come from me. It came from Donald Trump. It was an interview he gave a number of years ago to Meet the Press, where he was explaining his longtime support for partial birth abortion. And his explanation was, hey, I'm from New York. Those are New York values. They're not Iowa values. And so I was repeating Donald's own phrasing. Now let me be clear, as I've said many times. The people of New York, the folks here, y'all have suffered under the left-wing Democratic policies year after year after year that are foisted on you by politicians who aren't listening to you. And Heidi and I, we are fighting for you. We're fighting for the people of New York who are fed up why Governor Cuomo thinks that New Yorkers don't want jobs and won't allow fracking to develop the natural resources. Pennsylvanians get jobs. But Cuomo thinks that y'all don't want jobs. I know the men and women here, y'all are frustrated when Mayor Bill de Blasio, in his first weeks in office, goes up to Harlem and tries to shut down charter schools because he says young African American and Hispanic kids don't get to go to school because he's so in hock to the teachers' unions. And I'll tell you, there was a moment that illustrated the left-wing Democratic values perhaps better than any other. And it was when the brave men and women of the NYPD stood up and turned their back on Bill de Blasio. Millions of us cheered along with those heroes who risk their lives every day because we're tired of politicians, whether it's de Blasio or Obama or Hillary Clinton, who over and over and over again side with the criminals and the looters rather than the people who are risking their lives to keep us safe.
Senator, you know that phrase has hurt you here in New York, right?
Well, I do know that it has hurt me with the media, which is the media lit their hair on fire. But I will say, if there ever comes a day when I'm winning the poll among the media, I will have done something profoundly wrong, and I'm not holding my breath.
Okay, let's get another question.
All right, we have Todd Cologne here. He owns a pizza shop in New York City. He's undecided, but leaning towards Donald Trump. So what's your question for the senator?
Hi, I'm a lifelong Republican, and I've been married to my husband for 2 years now. And my question is, I've noticed a lot of religious freedom laws and somewhat institutionalized discrimination laws happening around the country. What would you as president do to protect me and my husband from that institutionalized discrimination?
Well, listen, when it comes to religious liberty is something that protects every one of us. It is the very First Amendment, the very first phrase protected in the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights. And religious liberty, it applies to Christians, it applies to Jews, it applies to Muslims, it applies to atheists. And all of us, we want to live in a world where we don't have the government dictating our beliefs, dictating how we live. We have a right to live according to our faith, according to our conscience. And that freedom ultimately protects each and every one of us. And we shouldn't have the right to force others to knuckle under and give up their faith and give up their belief. And for me, I mean, I have spent my entire adult life fighting to defend religious liberty, fighting to defend the freedom of every one of us to seek out and worship God. And I think keeping government out of the way of your lives protects the freedom of every one of us.
But when you talk about freedom, and what he's referred to with his husband, a lot of people would say, doesn't everybody have the freedom to be treated equally? Don't we all have the freedom to be equal?
Of course we do. And the First Amendment protects everyone equally. It protects our faith. It protects the faith of an Orthodox Jew to follow his or her faith without the government getting in the way and regulating kosher delis and restricting what can be served. It protects the freedom of all of us.
You know, you supported a constitutional amendment that would have the effect of overturning the Supreme Court decision on gay marriage. So what would that mean for couples like Todd and his husband who already are married?
Well, listen, I am a constitutionalist, and under the Constitution, marriage is a question for the states. That has been the case from the very beginning of this country, that it's been up to the states. And so if someone wants to change the marriage laws, I don't think it should be 5 unelected lawyers down in Washington dictating that. And even if you happen to agree with that particular decision, why would you want to hand over every important public policy issue to 5 unelected lawyers who aren't accountable to you, who don't work for you? Instead, if you want to change the marriage laws, convince your fellow citizens to change the laws. And by the way, it may end up that we've got 50 states, that the laws in one state may be different than another state, and we would expect that. We would expect the people of New York to adopt different laws, perhaps, than the people of California or Texas or Florida. And that's the great thing about a big, diverse country, is that we can have different laws that respect different values.
This is a very important issue, and another one is about gun violence. And Amy has a question.
That's right. Dimas Salaberios, an undecided Republican from the Bronx, and you are tall, but I will try to reach up here and get the microphone to you so you can ask the senator your question.
How you doing? I'm an ex-drug boss in New York City.
Wow.
A pastor now.
Fabulous.
In the housing projects in the Bronx. And wrote a book called Street God, and here's my question. In my community here in New York City, guns are coming in from the South into our African American and Latino communities. And wanted to know, if you became president, what would you do to stop the gun pipeline from coming into my neighborhoods from the South?
Well, let me say, first of all, thank you for the ministry that you have, and thank you for your example, standing up and touching the lives of young men and young women in your community. Thank you for what you're doing. You know, the plague of gun violence we're seeing is horrific, and I believe we need to use every tool possible to go after the criminals. In the wake of the Newtown shooting, the horrible shooting at that elementary school, which horrified all of us, I joined with Senator Chuck Grassley in drafting legislation that became known as the law enforcement alternative. And what it did is it targeted bad guys. It targeted felons. It targeted fugitives. Felons and fugitives, for example, who try to illegally buy firearms. And there are tens of thousands of them every year that are caught illegally buying firearms. Right now, the Justice Department isn't prosecuting them.
I'm talking about gun dealers in the South that are not drug dealers, but are buying these guns and shipping them into my community. Can you deal with that? The urban community, not that area you just mentioned.
Well, but the way to solve gun violence, I believe, is targeting the criminals, not targeting law-abiding citizens. If you look at the jurisdictions with the worst murder rates, most of them are the ones with the very strictest gun control laws. Because when you put gun control laws in place, the criminals don't hand over their guns, but the law-abiding citizens do, and it ends up leaving them more vulnerable. And so you look at Washington, D.C., you look at Chicago, both of them have for years effectively banned firearms, and both of them have for years been right at the top of murder rates. I don't think the answer is stripping people's rights to defend themselves. Listen, if you're a single mom living in a tough neighborhood, the Second Amendment protects your right that if someone comes through the window trying to harm your kids, you have a right to protect your kids. You have a right to be armed and protect your family. And I believe the way to stop the gun violence is not disarming the law-abiding citizens, but rather targeting the criminals and coming down on them like a ton of bricks. And the point I was making, I drafted legislation that would go after the criminals, that would prosecute any felon or fugitive who tries to illegally buy a gun. And the Democrats filibustered it. Harry Reid led the filibuster because their view was if they couldn't strip away the Second Amendment rights of everybody here, they weren't willing to go along with targeting criminals. It doesn't work when you strip the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens. I want to target the bad guys and not the good guys.
Senator, we got a lot more questions coming up.
Well, welcome you back to GMA and our town hall with Ted Cruz, live here in Times Square and all across the country. We have one of our viewing parties there in Maryland. And Heidi Cruz is going to join us up here on the stage in just a moment. But first, Senator Cruz is answering your questions just one more day to go before the big primary here in New York.
That's right. Next week, Pennsylvania votes. That's where we're going to go right now. John Carl's in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He's with voters at Honey Sit and Eat. Got a lot of questions for the senator. Let's go, John.
Hey, George, Robin, Senator Cruz. I'm joined here with Hannah O., 22-year-old Pennsylvania Republican voter, who, Senator Cruz, I believe is highly likely to vote for you, but has a highly relevant question here, considering it is tax day. What's your question, Hannah?
Hi, Senator Cruz. With a Congress that can barely pass a simple budget, how do you plan to pass something as contentious as the flat tax and abolish the IRS?
Well, Hannah, thank you for that question, and thank you for coming out today. You know, today, as everyone sends in their taxes, it really underscores the burden that our taxes put on our economy. My #1 priority as president is jobs and economic growth. I think jobs and economic growth are what New Yorkers want. They're what people in Pennsylvania and Maryland want. They're what people all across this country want. And the biggest barrier to job creation is federal taxes and federal regulations. And we need to pull them back. Now, listen, passing a flat tax. I'm running on a simple flat tax where every American, every one of us, we can fill out our taxes on a postcard. And then, as you noted, we're going to abolish the IRS. Now, your question is, how do we get it done? I will readily confess that ain't easy. That is not a simple thing to do. But, you know, we have a great historical analog to it. If you look back to 1981, Ronald Reagan had just been elected president in a landslide election. And when he got in, Tip O'Neill, the Democratic Speaker of the House, told Reagan, said, don't even bother to send your tax plan to Congress. It is dead on arrival. Those are the words Tip used. Now, Reagan didn't saunter down to Capitol Hill and pour a scotch and use his legendary Irish wit on him. He knew that wouldn't work. Instead, Reagan went over his head, went straight to the American people, made the case to the American people. Tip had 20 Democratic votes in a Democratic House, but suddenly millions of Americans began lighting up the phones calling Congress, and Tip's 20 votes became 19, became 18, became 17, and it disappeared. We passed one of the biggest tax reforms, one of the biggest tax cuts in the history of this country, and it unleashed unbelievable economic growth. I intend to do the same thing with a simple flat tax, with abolishing the IRS. We're going to make 2016, the general election, a referendum on abolishing the IRS and repealing Obamacare. And the way to get it done is come out of the election with a mandate from the people. Let me explain it very simply. There's an old joke that politics is Hollywood for ugly people. That's how you get it done. You change the incentives where elected politicians want to stay in office. In other words, I can't get it done. It takes you. It takes every one of us. The only way to get it done is the way Reagan did it, with the Reagan Revolution, with a grassroots tidal wave. And I believe that's what we're seeing across the country.
Related economic issue, national debt. Senator Cruz, you heard Donald Trump say a couple weeks back that he could eliminate the national debt in just 8 years. You don't think that's possible?
Well, listen, Donald's calculator is missing a few keys. He's always interesting to watch. He's a fun entertainer. But Donald has no real solutions. If you look at the problems facing, you know, it's been a couple of months since we've had a debate because Donald is terrified of debating. The Democrats are debating. Now, why is it that the Democrats think the people of New York deserve a debate, and yet Donald Trump is so scared of a debate that he won't give the people of New York a debate? The reason is he doesn't have an answer. How do you bring jobs back to America? Donald has no idea. He has no proposals, no substance. On foreign policy, how do you defeat ISIS? Donald has no idea whatsoever. And so when it comes to the debt, he doesn't understand the problem. He hasn't spent any time studying. I'm running on 3 key issues: jobs, freedom, and security. You want to bring jobs back to America? I'll tell you how you do it. You lift the burdens on small businesses, tax reform and regulatory reform. You repeal Obamacare. You stop amnesty. You pull back the regulators. When's the last time you heard Donald Trump talk about regulators? Let me tell you, the EPA and federal regulators are hammering small businesses. You know, the gentleman with a pizza shop earlier today. How many small business owners are getting hammered by federal regulators? If I'm elected president, we're going to pull back the regulators, which means you're going to be able to expand your pizza shop. You're going to be able to hire more employees, and that's what people want. Donald doesn't have an answer to any of that. That's why he's hiding from debates and instead sitting there tweeting, we need real solutions to the problems facing this country.
What do we say? If we bring up your wife, Heidi Cruz, if you'll join us here with your husband, Heidi Cruz. You know, no one knows this man better than you, Mrs. Cruz. But first of all, I read somewhere that at the age of 8, you fell in love with politics. That there was some. What was it?
Well, I think what I may have said is I fell in love with business when I was a young child. My parents had my brother and I started business. And I learned very quickly that it's good to have less regulation rather than more. In fact, we had a thriving little bread business and we thought of expanding it, but it caused us to have to do a lot of regulatory things, and so we stayed small. But I did become interested in politics, to answer your question, and I think the beginning of it was sitting, selling bread behind my bread stand, reading Time magazine. And I used to read that magazine when I was a kid, and I followed the elections, the early elections in the 80s. And then my parents took us to see a lot of things, and we went to visit Washington, D.C., like a lot of families do. And I saw what an incredible potential that the houses of Congress, the executive branch, our judicial branch have to lead this country, and I became interested.
If your husband is elected, you're living there on Pennsylvania Avenue, what would be your focus as First Lady?
Well, as I've said before, we are in the middle of an intense primary. And we are working hard to earn the support of Republican primary voters, and it's been an exciting process. We've had an incredible success, and it's easy to campaign for Ted. So we have not spent a lot of time on my agenda. I've had a very simplified job description, which is to help Ted win. But I do have interests, and I think one of the greatest honors of being Ted's partner in this is being able to do things that have the greatest needs in this country. And Ted and I have always agreed that school choice would be the very top of that agenda, that when kids have the opportunity for an education, a terrific education, it's what gave so many of us our start.
And being his partner, you have been on the campaign trail, and you have heard the negativity throughout on both sides, and people have often commented on that. And we have something that we want to show you, the things that some of the people who are running against you have said over this process.
Oh, this will be delightful.
Ted Cruz has just been telling lies.
Senator Ted, the smear artist.
He's a nasty guy. Nobody likes him. Nobody likes him anywhere once they get to know him.
You know, people, it's been such a harsh campaign again on both sides of the aisle. How has that impacted your family?
Well, you know, when it doesn't upset the candidate, it's a lot easier on the family. And one of the qualities that I've always admired about Ted, really since the day we met, is how incredibly unflappable he is. Things don't really bother Ted that bother most people. And a reason for that I've seen over the last 16 years is because Ted is in politics for the issues, to focus on the issues, to get things done, and he really does depersonalize a lot of these attacks. I want to add one thing, which is the kids. They always say the things that are the truest. And the other day, Caroline, who's just turned 8, she would want all of you to know that she has just turned 8 on Thursday. She said, you know, Mom, as we go through these states, more and more people are going to vote for Daddy because they're going to know him. And when people know my dad, they vote for him.
Not bad. You know, we got to get another voter question. I just want to ask you real quickly, what kind of bread was it?
Well, generally whole wheat bread. My mom had a great recipe, but we did little things around Christmas. We made cinnamon bread during Christmas. We raised our prices. We lowered them. We made bigger loaves and smaller loaves. But I mentioned that experience because teaching kids that they can do something that adds value, that they get paid for, and that they can adjust when they make mistakes, and failure is okay. You can start again, and taking some risk and having to count money and save. All those things are great skills. So another thing that I would focus on is some aspect of entrepreneurship. There are a lot of great organizations that already do that. But these are great, just foundational skill building things that happen in the private sector.
Okay, thank you. Back now with our Coffee with the Candidates Town Hall here with Senator Ted Cruz, his wife Heidi. And Amy's over here. You got a question from Instagram?
That's right, I do. This one comes to us from Bonnie Pointer, an undecided voter from California. Take a look.
Hi, Senator Cruz. My name is Bonnie, and I'm a grandmother of 3 from California. My question to you is, would you accept being Donald Trump's vice president?
Well, Bonnie, thank you for that question. Let me just answer very simply. I have zero interest whatsoever in doing it. And there are a lot of reasons, but perhaps the simplest is if Donald is the nominee, Hillary wins. Hillary wins by double digits, and I don't think there's anything we can do to change that. And the stakes are too high. That's why nationwide 65 to 70% of Republicans recognize Donald Trump loses to Hillary. It's why we're seeing Republicans uniting behind our campaign. It's why out of the 17 Republican candidates who started this race, 5 of them are supporting our campaign. We've been supported now by Rick Perry, by Lindsey Graham, by Jeb Bush, by Scott Walker, by Carly Fiorina. Now, all of us started out as opponents. We've come together and united because we've got to win. And if Donald's the nominee, he loses. If I'm the nominee, I beat Hillary Clinton. We're beating her in key swing states. We're beating her with independents. We're beating her with young people. And we've got to win. We can't do another 4 or 8 more years on the road we're on right now.
Of course, Yes, we're here to talk about serious issues.
Yeah.
But voters also like to get to know all the candidates. Look, your wife is now, she's lighting up. She knows what this is leading to. So we've heard about the lighter side of Ted Cruz, Heidi, and something about impressions. He does impressions really well.
Well, you know, there are people who do impressions, and then there are the rest of us who do not. Ted is one of those who does impressions. Ted's really funny. Ted has a great sense of humor. He loves to tell jokes. He and Caroline, our 8-year-old, go back and forth, and they're the only two people in the family that think the jokes are funny. But they are from the 8-year-old joke book. And so Ted has another thing I love about Ted is he has a great sense of humor. And so he is given to impressions, and a couple of them are quite good.
Well, let's take a look. No. Let's take a look. Let's take a look right here.
Smithers, release the hounds. Excellent.
Heidily ho, neighbor. Oakley dokley, neighborino.
But Dad, I'm a vegetarian. I don't eat animals.
But Lisa, animals are so delicious. There's the animal we get bacon from, the animal we get ham from, the animal we get sausage from.
Dad, that's all the same animal.
Oh, sure, Lisa. A magic animal that all the wonderful foods come from.
Forward, not backwards. Upwards, not downwards. And always twirling, twirling for freedom.
Something we saw on BuzzFeed. We thought we'd share with the masses. So what's your favorite impression that he does?
I think the Simpsons and Lisa, being a vegetarian from California, having my meat-eating Latin Texan husband explain the many sources of good food. We have a family debate going. Catherine is 5, and she says she's mixed. She's vegetarian and meat-eating.
Well, I got to ask you. You've been on the stage many times with Donald Trump. Can you do a Donald Trump?
You know, I don't have a Donald impression. You know, he's one of a kind, and I'm glad to leave it at that.
Take a quick break.
We'll be right back.
And we're back now with Ted and Heidi Cruz. Time for a quick speed round right now with our voters here in Times Square, starting out with Raquel Reinstein from Forest Hills, New York.
Hi, Senator Cruz. What is your favorite place to take your wife on date night?
Oh, that's a great question. You know, we usually do date night, ideally Sunday nights, and we either do so on Friday nights, we take the girls out to California Pizza Kitchen and do a family night. Normally Sunday night, it's late, and we tend to do either sushi or Mexican, depending on the given night, but we do a lot of nights of late nights.
I mean, that's really on the both ends of that.
Well,
it's usually sushi.
Grace, what is your question? Where are you from in New York?
I'm from Suffolk County. My question is for Heidi. As First Lady, what kind of dog would you like to own while in the White House?
Oh, well, these things may be a little nostalgic back to childhood. We had a lovely little Cocker Spaniel named Roscoe, and he was my first dog. He had white hair on the top of his head, and so maybe we could bring him back.
Am I remembering right? You have a promise out to the girls on the dog?
We do. So they have one dog, Snowflake, which is this little white fur ball. He was a rescue puppy. And we promised the girls when we talked to them at the beginning, we said if we win, they can get a second dog. They wanted a pony, so the second dog was negotiating down.
Let's go to Oz Sultan.
Oz Sultan from Harlem, New York. The pressing question for New Yorkers: New York thin crust or Chicago deep dish? And this is to both of you.
Actually, I'm a thin crust guy.
Yeah. Thank you.
And I will note, in the critical pizza primary, I am the only one of the Republican candidates who doesn't eat pizza with a knife and fork. There's only one way to eat it, and that is in your hand.
Is it helpful to have these light moments? Of course, it's a very serious time, what we're facing in this country, but does it help to be able to have moments like this?
Oh, you've got to laugh. You've got to have fun. You know, yesterday we flew back home to Houston because we did Caroline's 8th birthday party, and we were at Build-A-Bear. And there was, 15 7- and 8-year-old girls, and it featured in the middle, I was instructed to charge into the middle of the girls and yell banana as loud as I could because they were all minions and they yelled banana and then tackled me. And look, that reminds you what you're fighting for and what you're doing.
And you've had the kids on the road with you as well, right?
They've been on the road a lot.
Yeah, they're here in New York.
Yeah. How many times are we going to mention she's 8 years old? She's going to love this. Keep hitting it.
We'll be right back.
Yeah. The week is off to a great start. We thank our group of Republican voters for asking great questions this morning, and those joining us from the Gateway Diner in good old Albany, New York, on Long Island, and the Montgomery County Republican Party in Rockville, Maryland. Our thanks to all.
Yeah, we had everybody out there. Also, Senator Ted Cruz is going to answer more of your questions in a live Facebook chat. That is coming up. You can join it now on the GMA Facebook page. We'll have another live town hall on GMA this Thursday. Hillary Clinton is going to be here joining us for that. Senator Heidi Cruz, thank you so much for joining us today. We had a great time with you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Have a great month.
Have a great day,
everyone.